All right, 4 o'clock. I always like to get started on time, so I especially respect the time of those of you who are very punctual. So welcome to the webinar. The topic today is how accelerating change threatens professionals and organizations. And I know that's kind of a gloomy sounding topic, but I think you'll find the webinar is actually very hopeful and practical in how it talks about becoming proactive and staying ahead of change. For those of you who know me, obviously, Daisy McCarty here. For those of you who haven't met me yet, I am an entrepreneur. I own a branding company. I work with B2B businesses. So I've been a self-directed learner for a long time. And this training that Ray has really caught my attention. So I wanted to make sure that's available to you. Just a couple of housekeeping tips before we get started. Everyone's on mute, but we do want to hear from you in the comment box and the question box. And if a couple of you can type in a little quick hello, that'll let us know that those functions are working. And it's where you'll enter your questions in the Q&A portion of the program. So you can type in your questions at any time, but we'll be saving those to address them after Ray's presentation to keep everything on track time-wise. I wanted to talk just a bit about why I'm hosting this webinar. Most of you participating tonight are folks I've worked with or networked with over the past year. And I didn't send out invitations to 1,000 people for this webinar. I invited each one of you personally. So I knew we would have a group on this call of entrepreneurs and business leaders, people who are really dedicated to continuous improvement. And I let Ray know this so he could put together a presentation that's going to be most helpful for this particular group. And one of the problems that comes up when you're leading a business is decision making. And we run into trouble when we're making decisions based on incomplete information or when we're incorrectly interpreting the information that we have. And there's more information coming at us all the time, which means being able to sort, assess, and make decisions requires a higher level of intuition. And for that to work, we really need to know who, what, and when to trust. And that's really the core of what we'll be looking at today. So I'd like to introduce our presenter, Ray Burchett. He is the co-founder of Accelerated Intelligence, and that's what he calls The Other AI. You can find that at theotherai.com. He and I connected last year on LinkedIn, and we had a series of really interesting conversations over a period of several months. He has a bit of an unexpected background. He was educated and trained professionally as an accountant, and he worked at Arthur Andersen, which sounds pretty predictable and not very fast-paced. But then he made a switch to working in the stock market, and that's not in a cushy office job, but trading out on the floor in the S&P 500 futures pit at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And he spent 20 years in that really hyper-dynamic environment where it's not enough to just react quickly. You have to be ahead of the game and make better, faster, smarter decisions than the person next to you. So over the years, he's developed this training to help people develop high intuitive function. It's really not like anything else I've seen, and I'm a self-development fiend. So that's why I've been taking the time to tell people about it. And I'll let Ray take just a minute to tell you about the organizations that use or are considering implementing this type of training. Ray, would you like to tell us a bit about that so people can understand the different ways this can be applied?
Sure, and Daisy, thank you for putting this together and hosting, and welcome to everybody. I really appreciate you trusting us with your time. The first and foremost, traders started using this technology, and in '97, I co-founded Local Knowledge, and we really helped pioneer online trader development training over the internet. And there was a lot of things in my head then, and certainly was mindful of what allowed me to turn the corner as a trader. And it was just really understanding that everyone can do stuff at the functional level. For me as an accountant, it was GAAP, FASB, the tax code, know it well, pass the CPA exam, right? So we all have the standards we have to meet at the functional level. And that's the foundation. And then the game changer are best practices, how we take those absolutes of our profession, if you will, and then apply them for our point of differentiation to create greater value in the marketplace. And that all sounds really logical and well and good. I mean, that's what happened to me at Arthur Andersen. They saw that I had the foundation, so they taught me their best practices. And in the late 90s, things started to change. I'd been on the floor since 1983. But to put things in perspective, in the late 90s, we had the personal computer and the internet come together, and change just took off faster than anyone could even comprehend. And what started to become apparent, and is still a huge problem today, is simply referred to as engagement and culture. No one really talked about it until the late 90s, and they figured they had to have a culprit for the disconnect, so they blamed it on engagement and culture. And they've put all this effort into trying to fix it, and there is some success. It's great that they're more sensitive to it, but for the most part, they think they're painting the barn, but they're not even hitting the outhouse. They do not understand the problem. And I'm not a genius. I was just really fortunate to have worked in a corporate environment and actually with audit clients, uh, experienced multiple cultures as an auditor, and then coming to the floor of the Mercantile Exchange, that hyper-dynamic environment. And that gave me the perspective to really understand the problem and how to solve it. And it was something that was always in the back of my head, but trading was always at the front part. And when I started Local Knowledge in 97, I started thinking more and more about the need on the engagement and culture side and the more mainstream need to speed up the brain's ability to filter, process, and apply information. And that's really why we have poor engagement, poor culture. In other words, we're spending more time chasing than staying ahead. That's frustration, anxiety, and stress. And that's no fun. We're going to be disengaged. And when we're in an environment where everybody has that same challenge, they're all, or I should say, we're all playing catch up. We don't have time to notice or be aware of the folks around us when they need help, and they're not doing that for us. And so you're not going to have much of a culture if you don't have each other's back. And so that problem has just gotten worse and worse because the way they've tried to solve engagement and culture is to get into profiling, Myers-Briggs, DISC, Jung, or examples of that. And on one level to better understand, and now they have a diversity training and they get into ethics, and we've had the sex discrimination and all of that. But what it comes down to is how much awareness we have so we can really self-direct. In other words, stay targeted on the work that matters most. That's key to being engaged. And step two, have the sensitivity for our preparedness, how effective we're doing, so we can see and fill the gaps. And where that's addressed, Lean, Sigma, Baldrige, again, it's at the functional level. It's not at the foundational level, the beliefs and behaviors that really have to be strengthened to solve the problem, to create the awareness. So the application of this to date has certainly been in the trading community. It's all about speeding up the brain to keep decisions further ahead of price movement. In 2015, well, actually, it started in 2011. The Department of Homeland Security found out about what we were doing, and we had our first interactions with them, and the sequester hit, and that there was no money. In 2015, they came back to us, and we did a proof of concept and knocked it out of the park. But it couldn't gain approval out of the ODNI, though there was very much recognition and want for the program. And why it's so important to the intelligence community is human context. In other words, it's a boatload of data, information, Um, and you have to have human context to interpret it all correctly. And when you have more and more information, more and more events, it's human nature to take the path of least resistance and start to use technology to offload that work to. And certainly there's great tools um, to pop patterns, facial recognition, voice recognition, um, doing scans for patterns and relationships and things like that that computers are really good at. But it's human context that is going to make the connections. And a big part of that is collaboration, talking things through with others. And so, and then there's also just doing things better and faster, speeding up the brain. So there was a lot of benefit. And they came back to us again last year. And fortunately, leadership has turned around, and now we're have the first class filled, and we're just waiting for dates. And very much looking forward to getting that going. And when we did the proof of concept, we trained senior intelligence officers in 8 central states. And these are the folks that interact with the governors and the state police captains and superintendents of the municipalities, police departments. And anyway, it was all very, very well received. And about 18 months ago, we released ethics and performance training for business professionals, entrepreneurs, so they could have higher awareness to better anticipate client, customer, team, and organizational needs. And that actually came about. My alma mater, the University of Illinois, approached me. And so that's, and still wondering what's going to happen with them. But that was the motivation for creating that. And that's the program that Daisy went through. And fortunately, a whole bunch of other folks, and they seem to really like it. So that's what I'm going to share with you. And we have, I was just sharing with Daisy before we came on the air, we just completed competitive intelligence for athletes and coaches and their parents. And again, I will get into intuitive function in detail, but it's the ultimate differentiator in business. It's the ultimate differentiator in trading and intelligence, and in sports. It's in relationships. It just comes down to our intuition, and I'm going to get to that in great detail. So if you're not clear on what intuition is, don't feel bad. I will sort that out. So what I want to do is just ask you guys to close your eyes for a minute and just listen carefully, see how this fits for you. We all want to get better, but somehow we almost always struggle to follow through. We'll join a health club, start a diet with good intentions, sense of responsibility, understanding of need, and then fail at execution. Why? We get distracted, conflicted over how to use our time. That ever-increasing volume of speed and information and events takes over a little more each day. Shifting our values to believe jumping to answer an email or message ring is more responsible than developing the awareness to stay ahead of the needs of others. Staying ahead is a key to finishing what we start. Imagine what it would be like to live a day ahead of events. The awareness you would have, expectations tightly aligned with events as they occur. Variations would be minimal, details viewed in high definition, precise adjustments made, outcomes desired, secured. This future is achieved when we stop blocking ourselves from realizing, amplifying our potential. We've been told thousands of times how to do this, how to be our best. We've never had the context, the perspective to really understand. We tell ourselves we know, but never get past that surface understanding to do it, to change, to get ahead and accelerate. So this is your chance to slow down, to stop and look around, to see what needs to be done. Then start pulling back that rubber band, building the energy to win the race and start another instead of never seeing the finish line. So ignore the temptation to diminish the messenger and the message. That's what we're conditioned to do. Create the space in your brain to stay present and listen so you can connect to the person you desire to be. Accept my invitation to regain control. Instead of telling yourself how smart you are or what you don't have time to do, open your heart to how much more you can be. So, I apologize if that may have been a little harsh for anybody, but we're our own worst enemy. And so we just need to be able to sit back and understand that so much more is possible. We have the potential if we just give ourselves a chance to get to it. And so that's what I'm going to share with you, get you excited about doing. So why aren't we prepared? Why did I say earlier that higher education, professional development, organizational training don't understand the problem? Well, they just haven't had the benefit of immersion in a hyperdynamic environment to understand the problem and the solution. As I said, they overweight functional instruction at the expense of strengthening the behaviors that are going to cause our brain to filter, process, and apply information most effectively. And then the second part of the problem is cultural messaging. We're told to get the smarter smartphone, the app, the next technology. Nobody's telling you to strengthen the behaviors causing your brain to filter, process, and apply information most effectively. No one's telling you to strengthen human context. So we have this great learning gap. As I said, up into the late 90s, it was fine. We could do everything at that functional level and then build best practices off of it. Well, when things are going so fast, we can't wait for the next certification. I can't wait for, the next 80 hours of continuing professional education. In other words, improvement has to be unconscious, continuous, and accelerating. And we all hear continuous improvement. We think of Lean, we think of Baldrige. And again, that's at the functional level. But what really drives it are foundational beliefs and behaviors. And they haven't taught us that. We know them, they're familiar to us, but we don't know them past the surface level. We don't know them in their relationship to each other. And when we do, we get this incredible power. You can think of this as the cognitive engine that optimizes decision making and execution. It's blurred out because I have nowhere near the time in this presentation to lay a foundation, and to just put this out there without a foundation would be counterproductive. But this is what's missing. This is what we don't understand. This is the context, the perspective that we need to become highly intuitive. So real quick, the difference between intuitive function and instinctive behavior. Intuitive function is proactive. It's the unconscious application of our learned and developed skill, knowledge, and experience. Instinctive behavior is reactive. It's the unconscious application of behaviors shared by a species necessary to its survival. It's part of our DNA. It keeps us safe. So if I were to go to the outback and brought an automobile with me and was able to make contact with a tribe of Aborigines, they would instinctively freeze when they saw the automobile. Never part of the industrial world, so they would have to assess risk. And then hopefully they would start to approach. And then maybe I can seduce them with the new car smell to sit inside the automobile. But they would not intuitively know how to operate the car, no learned and developed skill, knowledge, and experience. And this gets misrepresented all the time. We'll hear sports play-by-play and color people talk about the instincts of a player. Well, the only thing that's instinctive is our desire to compete, to hit the other person harder than they hit us, to get up off the ground quickly so we don't show any pain or setback, if you will. But everything that happens out on the court, the ice, the field, is intuitive, unconscious application of learned and developed skill, knowledge, and experience. And so that is the big thing to understand. The other thing is we are all intuitive to some degree. The most effective just achieve and sustain higher intuitive states. It's that high awareness that allows us to project expectations tightly aligned with events as they occur, see the details in high def, make precise adjustments, securing the outcomes desired. And it's really important to understand that ordinary people do extraordinary things all the time. And they do it because they can stay focused on the work that matters most. They're great at targeting their efforts. They also have great sensitivity for their preparedness. So you can imagine how engaged and how effective they are, because they have a process that keeps them targeted and earns the feedback where they can keep self-correcting. Unconscious improvement, keep seeing and filling the gaps. And that's what happens when we fill this gap, when we understand the mechanics, developing and supporting high intuitive function. But we're too busy falling behind to stop and take back control. I want you to think about the last 30 days. I want you to write down a ratio that represents the time spent chasing versus staying ahead of events. First number is chasing, second is staying ahead. Again, over the last 30 days, and please write this down. See it in black and white. I don't want you to put it up in the question panel, but just for yourself, write it down. And if you're writing 60 chasing, 40 ahead, or 70 chasing, 30 ahead, don't feel bad. That's normal. When I do this and I say 50-50, they're like, I'll take that right now. Most people would be thrilled if they were at 50-50. Well, I want you to imagine what your life would be like if it was 40-60, 40 chasing, 60 ahead. That would be a 20% improvement from 50-50. I want you to imagine what that would mean to you at the end of the day, a week, a month, a year, having 20% more of your time. That would be huge. And then imagine what happens when everyone on your team has that, or within your group or division or your organization. And here's the real cool part. Once you learn how to get that 20% improvement, then you just keep getting more and more. You go from 40/60 to 30/70 faster, then 20/80 faster, then 10/90 faster. And why does that happen? Why is it so powerful? Because you're just putting yourself back into balance. You're restoring that harmony. You're who you want to be all the time. Distraction and conflict are gone. And that's what happens when that engine, we know how to build it, take care of it, add horsepower to it, tune it up to our needs. So I want you to imagine each die in this image is a piece of information, and they're all simultaneously demanding our attention. Now I want you to imagine they're flying out at the screen at you at about 30 miles an hour, right? We're close, that would hurt. But imagine an invisible force field protecting us. And we can look into that horizon and we'd see a wall of information getting deeper, higher, and coming at us faster and faster by the moment. That's guaranteed. Rapidly advancing technology makes it so, ever increasing the volume and speed of information and events. So one of three things end up happening. The most common, turtle, dig a hole, run inside, close the door, lock it, hope it goes away. That's our instinct to survive, right? Well, this isn't going away. There's only going to be more, and it's coming faster. Second choice is just to be delusional and think, oh, it'll be okay. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. That's not going to work. And the third is to learn how to become highly intuitive. Have that superior awareness to project expectations tightly aligned with events as they occur. See the details in high def, make precise adjustments, securing the outcomes desired. When that happens, we have such clarity and focus for what's most relevant. We're like a missile accelerating out into the horizon, locked in on what we need. We're just eviscerating all of this noise. And we keep getting further out onto the horizon faster and faster. We go from chasing to staying further ahead of events. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Moore's Law, computing power doubling every 2 years. Ray Kurzweil, he was the chief engineer for Google. He's retired now, I believe. But he looked at Moore's argument and he said, hey, if computing power is doubling every 2 years, then so is the volume and speed of information. And he worked that out for his argument for singularity, that in the near future, we'll need a chip in our head to supplement our brain's ability. I don't think any of us wants that. But let's just take a look at the math to understand what's happening. And instead of going back to 1968, when Moore made this observation of computing power doubling every 2 years, I'm just going to use the year 2000 and assign a value of 1 unit to represent the collective power of information and technology. And then apply Moore's law, doubling every 2 years. That 1 unit was 256 in 2016, 512 in 2018. We're on our way to 1,024 in 2020. Ask yourself, have you doubled your brain's ability to filter, process, and apply information over the last 2 years? Fairly certain you haven't. But what you have done is you've become more and more dependent on technology. And yes, technology is incredibly powerful. It's going to continue to become more and more helpful. but it will not replace human context, our ability to reason. The more dependent we are on technology, the more we lose our identity, our independence, our ability to break it down and think it through, our ability to earn that professional and personal fulfillment by staying ahead of the needs of others. We're not going to be happy. And a little added incentive, by 2022, it's at 2,048 units and just keeps doubling. And this slope is actually way steeper when you think about what quantum computing, how it's antiquated Moore's law. Now, I know that sounds scary. The good news is they've looked at the work and energy used by a supercomputer. And then they've compared that to a human work and energy. Human kicks butt, exponentially more efficient. In other words, we have incredible potential. We just have to figure out how to get there, how to become more intuitive, how to consistently achieve superior awareness to project expectations tightly aligned with events as they occur. That's what we teach people to do, to get to that potential. So that storm of information and events, it's just going to become more intense. It's just going to keep raging. And the only thing that's going to stand between us and that storm is our process. And when you think of process, think of this. Think of your process as a structure that lets you organize, access, target, realize, amplify your accumulated skill, knowledge, and experience, creativity and imagination, individually and collectively. In other words, we've got this spaghetti bowl of good stuff, our life's work, all the wisdom we've earned, wisdom other folks have shared with us. And we get to some of it, some of the time, some of it a little bit more than others, but we still struggle to get to all of it and consistently apply it. So we have to keep going back into that spaghetti bowl. Well, when you learn how to develop and support high intuitive function, you have that structure now to organize, access, target, realize, and amplify individual and collective potential, and calibrate to the behaviors that make that structure, create that structure every day. So you consistently high intuitive function, outperforming by anticipating the needs of others. In other words, when you have that structure, you turn that spaghetti bowl into your lightsaber. And then you keep making it more powerful through that same structure, driving unconscious, continuous, and accelerating improvement. And that's what happens when we fill the gap, when we know how to build, take care of, add horsepower to, and fine-tune that engine that optimizes decision-making and execution. So when we fill that gap, we are really targeted on what's most relevant. We have great sensitivity for our preparedness. In other words, we have a tangible understanding for how we're accepting and holding ourselves accountable to the absolutes that best practices are built on. We are way more accountable at that functional level. But it's happening now at the foundational level because we have an understanding, tangible understanding for the beliefs and behaviors that are keeping us targeted and give us that great sensitivity for preparedness at the functional level. And that much more tangible understanding at the foundational level, how we're supporting our efforts at the functional level, that's what builds a strong conviction for who, what, and when to trust, starting with ourselves. That ratio of time spent chasing versus staying ahead, is so out of whack? Because we're burning up all of our energy trying to figure out who, what, and when to trust. That's where distraction and conflict comes from. But when we have that strong conviction, that goes away. Now we do not fear sharing information, answering questions, asking questions. Distraction and conflict is gone. We have so much more awareness, we can start handing the wrench before someone needs it. And they're doing the same for us. When we learn how to fill that gap, build, take care of, add horsepower to, fine tune that engine, when everyone knows how to do that, that gives us a shared understanding for how to best direct and support improvement and performance. There's no doubt. When everyone aligns to that shared understanding, well, you have the engagement and culture problem solved. Because now there's no conflict. You've created a frictionless environment. So we're familiar of peak performance, flow state, the zone, you might know it as. We've all experienced it, and then we're maddened by not being able to be at that high level all the time. Well, we can't get there because we don't understand the mechanics that consistently will give us that superior awareness to project expectations tightly aligned with events as they occur, minimize variance, so we can see details in high def and make precise adjustments. But when we learn the intuitive development process, that structure strengthen those behaviors that cause the brain to filter, process, and apply information most effectively, the frequency and intensity of peak performance goes through the roof. We've placed our identity independence so far beyond the reach of that ever-increasing power of machines. I don't have time to get into just how we are targeted and manipulated more and more every day. But just know that everything you do online, from browsing to purchasing to who you interact with, has all built your profile. Don't think your privacy rights have been respected in any way, shape, or form. Not by Google, not by Amazon, not by Apple, not by Facebook, not by Twitter. You will be shocked when you learn how First and Fourth Amendment rights have just been absolutely trampled by these social platforms. And it's all purposeful to keep us off balance, so we're that much easier to manipulate, deceive, exploit. So this is so powerful, filling this gap, because it minimizes risk for bias in how we filter, process, and apply information. We're all biased. But it minimizes that because it gives us great sensitivity that when we hear something familiar, to not tell ourselves how smart we are, but instead stop and recognize it as an opportunity to learn, to connect a dot, to get below the surface. When we fill the gap, we neutralize development and performance risk. And that's defined by 3 blind spots. The difference between what we believe we know and the actual depth of our knowledge, how we perceive our behavior and the reality of our conduct, and our inability to know how our behavior impacts the efforts of others. Any one of those can be fatal to a career or an organization. Fill the gap, those risks are neutralized. So I can't start on the engine with you today, but I'm going to give you 2 exercises that are going to make a big difference right away. They're simple, and you can share them with other folks in your company, your associates, your team. These 2 tools are so powerful because they shut down your ego. So we stop telling ourselves we can control things that we can't, know things that we don't, and blocking ourselves from gaining deeper understanding for what we believe we already know. Just think how many times a day our ego crushes us. And it's got a lot of help because the cultural messaging is right there with it to tell us we can control things that we can't, know things that we don't. When you understand how hideous entitlement mentality and how it is promoted 24/7 by the popular culture that is depriving people of their dignity, their essence, across every socioeconomic spectrum. So what happens when we listen to our ego, when we're played by this cultural messaging, we become the coyote chasing the roadrunner. And do a search if you're not familiar. You'll have cartoons pop up in about 15 seconds. Coyote can't catch the roadrunner, so he goes off and buys acceleration technology from Acme, an explosive device. And it always ends the same. The coyote ends up accelerating into the side of the mountain and blowing up, or off the side of the mountain and dropping hundreds of feet and blowing up because of that acceleration device being an explosive. See, the Roadrunner is relying on technology, what we're all programmed to do, rely on technology instead of strengthening human context. Just think if the coyote stopped and took the time to break things down and think it through, to get below the surface, to connect the dots, to work it out, he'd probably figure out where the Roadrunner was going to be instead of having to chase. So the first tool, whenever you sense anxiety, I want you to put your hands at your waist, palms down. Think of that as becoming full stop. And we can never be too sensitive to anxiety. Where's that anxiety coming from? Well, we've let our ego tell us we can control things that we can't. We hear that voice. We got to listen to it. Hey, Ray, you might want to stop and ask a question. So right now, it's great just to stop. But real quick, not only are you going to stop, you're going to start asking better questions. And more importantly, you're going to start to smile because you realize you're not being played, you're taking control. You're targeting yourself on the work that matters most. You're developing sensitivity for your preparedness. So the first tool, whenever you sense anxiety, we want to get really, really, really good at sensing anxiety. Boom, put those hands at your waist, palms down, full stop. Nobody's going to see it. You're just going to smile because you realized you just shut down your ego. You took back control. You're going to be that much more targeted, that much more sensitive. It'll start making a big difference in a short period of time. And then just keep challenging yourself to make sure you're asking a good question. In other words, take another breath. Ask a better question. In the beginning, I talked about stopping to pull back the rubber band, right? Well, that's what we all need to do. We are behind. The only way we're going to catch up is that we've got to change. And to change, we've got to go below the surface to understand what we need to change. We've got to slow down. And think of that stopping and slowing down and getting below the surface to understand is pulling back the rubber band, earning the energy you're going to need to slingshot forward to catch up. But none of that's going to happen if you don't slow down, stop, take control, start asking better questions, becoming more targeted, more sensitive, pulling back the rubber band. Next tool. When you hear a familiar word or phrase, what our ego wants to do is pull us away and play what's ever in the memory bank so we can tell ourselves how smart we are. Probably happened to you a couple times in this presentation. This is what kills us, because while we're letting our ego tell us how smart we are, we're blacked out from the information 10, 15, 30 seconds or more. We miss those nuggets we came for. So those nuggets are going to let us connect the dot to get to that deeper place, more targeted, more sensitive. Think about the folks that are most highly compensated, the specialists in medicine, engineering, and law. Their filter works like this. They hear something familiar, it's either within their scope or out. And if it's within their scope, it's like, chance to understand something a little bit better, dig a little bit deeper, crack open a door, step through, and then see more doors and have to be that much more precise. Why are these folks most highly compensated? Because they have superior awareness in their field. They project expectations tightly aligned with events as they occur, see details in high def, make precise adjustments, securing the outcomes desired. They don't tell themselves how smart they are. So, when you hear something familiar, give yourself a thumbs up. Hey, get a nugget, connect a dot, crack open a door, pull back the rubber band. So we're almost done here. We'll get to Q&A. But consider this. If your understanding for the power and construction of trust were complete, there would be no conflict. In other words, you wouldn't hesitate in asking a question. No one would hesitate in answering it. You wouldn't hesitate in answering a question for someone else. With that knowledge transferring, information flowing, supporting each other, we'd keep realizing our collective potential. We'd keep creating value on a scale we haven't imagined. We'd be sharing incredible abundance. We'd be racing to help each other out. We'd live in paradise instead of burning up our energy trying to figure out who, what, and when to trust, starting with ourselves. Those two tools, anxiety, sense it, palms down, right at your waist, full stop. Hey, I got to ask a question. Let me see how good a question I can ask. And then start finding the answer. Here's something familiar, thumbs up. Hey, chance to get below the surface, get to that deeper place of understanding, pull back the rubber band. So how do you get started? Accept that you need tool 1 and 2 and get really good at using them. Realize you need to slow down before you can start to change. And think of this as pulling back that rubber band, loading the energy you need to sling forward and catch up. And then you'll be in position to start building this engine. All right, Daisy, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ray. That was a lot, but it was definitely illuminating. I feel like the piece that I keep coming back to is the idea that you need to come at everything with fresh eyes. and not assume that you know more than you do. So you can shut down the ego and neutralize those blind spots. So yeah, we have time for a few questions here. If you guys would like to enter those in the Q&A box, I'll be able to read those out for Ray. But if we have a couple of minutes here, Ray, would you like to give us an idea of details about the training? I can tell you guys, I've seen all the blurred out stuff. I've been through the training once. I'm going through it my second time, and I'm still finding those new nuggets of information and new ways to apply that to benefit my life. But Ray, yeah, give us a little bit of an idea of how that training goes.
Sure. It's 2 phases. The first is about 20 hours intended to be completed over 2 to 3 weeks. It's a combination of about 6.5 hours of instruction, broken out into 17 on-demand learning modules so you can go at your own pace. And the only information we collect are name and email. You do all the work offline, writing in your own journal. So don't have any fear of having to share any information other than your name and email. And then there's 3 exercises that are real critical in building and adding horsepower to that engine. So between the instruction and exercises, it's a little right around 20 hours over 2 to 3 weeks. And then once that is done, then you start a 90-day reflection cycle. And again, that comes through your learners panel. And the reflections you're going to do in your journal, you're not putting any information online. But think of each week of that reflection cycle as a chapter in a book. And what it's doing is just giving you very targeted direction to fine-tune that engine to your specific development and performance needs. So and like I said, that's 1 reflection each weekday, 60 reflections total. Like I said, over 12 weeks, so that's about another 20 to 30 hours of time. So, 40 hours on the low end, 50 hours, maybe a little bit more on the high end over 4 months. But to give yourself that lightsaber that's just going to keep getting stronger and stronger, that superior awareness to keep anticipating the needs of others, project expectations tightly aligned with future events, frequently experience peak performance, flow state, the zone. And you have access for a full year. So people repeat it multiple times. I've been doing this core training since 2009. I've had people do it live online with me multiple times and then come to Chicago from as far as Singapore and Dubai to do it in person. So what happens the second time, and it'll be interesting to hear what Daisy has to say. People get a lot out of it after the first time through, and the second time they're like, how did you do that? Because they're amazed at how much more they get. And that's happening because the first time through, it's a bit of a roller coaster, really excited about how much more we're capable of and how achievable it is. And then frustrated that this wasn't shared with us before or sooner. So we missed chunks. And that second time through, you have the intuitive development process working for you. So now you've conditioned yourself to get below the surface. And so the combination of those 2 things is why people are amazed at how much that second time through. And then they get through it a second time and they want to go a third time right away because now practical application is making them much more targeted in the way they're going through the instructions. So they just get more and more faster and faster.
Yes, definitely. The good thing about the way the training works is that it's teaching you not to just gloss over things the second time through, but to dig deeper. So you're listening, but you're not telling yourself, oh, I've heard this already. Oh, I know this already. Because you've already seen through that trick, and you know not to go down that road. You know to start asking those deeper questions and getting to a deeper level of understanding. Definitely. So it looks like I don't see any questions in the question box right now. If you guys do have questions later on, feel free to reach out to me or to Ray on LinkedIn or via email. We're happy to answer those for you. I do want to let you guys know that Ray gave me a coupon code for anyone attending here who'd like to go through the whole training. That's $100 off. It looks like he's dropped the link there for you guys. I'll make sure you get that in a follow-up. Definitely enjoying my second time through it, and I'd love to have more people in my network going through the same process, because I know we all help each other get better over time. So Ray, are there any last words that you'd like to for our audience?
I'm just grateful for everyone being here. Please use the 2 tools. Here, sense anxiety, palms down, full stop, take back control, ask a question, keep asking better questions and answering them. Here's something familiar, thumbs up. You know, fire up your curiosity. Be like that 5-year-old. Why? In other words, everything out there is telling us, you know, we're too busy. We got to let technology do X, Y, and Z for us. You know, my only friendly advice is if you have an Amazon device, if you have a Gmail device in your house, an Apple device that's listening to you and you're saying, hey, Siri, how do I tie my shoes again? I would unplug and send those things off to the landfill. Use your brain. What's happening is the more we're in front of a computer, we keep narrowing the spectrum of our brain down because we're waiting for the next information to feed us. And yes, we're directing, but we're waiting. When we're in an analog environment, we're driving the whole thing. And so you want to hold your schedule in your head. You want to put pen to paper and get a deeper understanding with your thoughts. You want to remember your grocery list in your head. You want to keep, you know, certain things private, because I guarantee you everything's being listened to, everything's being recorded. And not that we're doing bad things or this, that, or the other, but they're just using that information to profile you, target you, and manipulate you in ways you can't imagine. So, again, trust your own curiosity, your ability to dig for information, your ability to reason. Keep that spectrum of your brain as wide open as you can, and use those 2 tools to get started.
Absolutely. Yeah, we got this. We humans, we will prevail. So thank you very much, Ray, for coming on the webinar. I know our audience definitely got a lot out of this. And thank you to everyone for attending. Great to have you guys on the call. Like I said, feel free to reach out. Let's all figure out ways to help each other be better. And I hope you all have a successful and inspired 2019.